First, let me start by welcoming everyone who has taken their time to join us this afternoon. Let me start by welcoming all of our panelists and thank them for their time. Let me also start welcoming everyone who has signed up for this webinar and has joined us. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that you're joining us on a Saturday. Our program is, as the chair Ferrell has said, it's a loaded program. Firstly, we will have a photo exhibition on coal and its impacts by Daylin Paul, followed by a youth panel discussion on broken promises and broken climate. It's going to be 3-minute inputs starting from 2:30 to 3. Let me just post the program in the chat so that as I speak, comrades can follow.
Charles, I've done it already, so you can carry on speaking. I've put the program into the chat.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Feria. And thereafter, we will have a very, very important discussion on eco-fascism and ecocide, a discussion that will help us situate and understand shallow approaches like carbon markets, carbon offsets mechanisms, the use of our forests as carbon sinks, the rise of nationalist ecology that is opposed to multiculturalism, the securitization of the climate problem, and the lifeboat approach that is adopted by some in the global north. So we'll have a very important discussion on ecofascism and ecocide. And thereafter, we will be launching or discussing some of the tools that we have been working on, starting with the just transition tool, followed by the food sovereignty and pathway tool, as well as the climate justice deal. That is our program for today. Now, this alternative to COP26 is very important because it is evident that the elite are not going to solve this problem. When you look at the nationally determined contributions, none of them commit to a 1.5 degree, to not going beyond 1.5 degrees, not even 2. The nationally determined contributions are taking us to 3 to 5 degrees of temperature increase. The elite are not going to solve this problem. Hence, we have to build a mass movement from below. The subaltern have to speak. This is why we are hosting this alternative, the people's alternative to COP26. With that, Chair, I hand back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. Comrades, as you come into the room, maybe you want to just say hi and just where you're from in the chat. I see a range of people already doing that. It would be nice just to introduce yourself a little bit. Without further ado, I want to hand over to Daylin. But before I do that, I just want to say, that one of the things about the work that we've been doing, we've merged kind of, taking into account arts, whether it's poetry, photographs, and telling a story using other means. And our arc of the, what is it called? The Arc of South Africa, basically, has photographs of ordinary people just taking pictures wherever they are and things that are relevant to climate change, things that they think would be impacted on by climate change. And I think it would be good for comrades to add, and I think you're going to be motivated by Daylin's presentation now, because you're gonna see all of these, and you're gonna add pictures to our arc of life. So I think, if someone can, comrades can put in the link to the arc so others can see other pictures. But before that, I want to hand over to Daylin to walk us through some of the amazing photographs that he has taken. Daylin, you're going to share your screen?
Yes, I will do that. I just wanted to say hi first so people could see me. Hi, I'm Daylin Paul. I'm a photographer, and I'm very grateful to be invited to this very important meeting today. So thank you very much. All right. So I'm going to be showing you a set of photographs, or a collection at least, a set from a collection known as Broken Land. I think I should give you a little bit of background first before we dive into it. So Broken Land is about coal mining and coal burning. I thought it was quite funny, or not really funny, but ironic, when I was invited to be a part of this panel and I saw that the next item up is called Broken Promises and Broken Planet, because I think, I mean, with my work being called Broken Land, it's a common theme. And what I saw, or what motivated me to do this project, which I've been working on on and off for about 6 years, is the notion of brokenness. So, I was actually driving back from Marikana back to Johannesburg. I was living in Johannesburg at the time, and I noticed, like, on the way back, that there was lots of sort of cracks in the earth where there'd been drought, and the thought crossed my mind that, in order to get to extractives, you have to break the ground, you have to break the earth apart, render it asunder, to get to those things. But I think also you've got to break your connection to the land. You've got to break your kind of understanding of what the land is and what it does for us. And I think that the kind of relationship that we're supposed to have with the land, a relationship that I think that, indigenous people before the colonial event and the preceding capitalist events had, a symbiosis and not a parasitic relationship, which is very, very clear, I think, to everyone right now, that this kind of a mindset of taking and exploiting or extracting, is the common thread through a lot of the social and environmental issues that we face today. And this is why my book and the collection starts off actually with this picture. So it is the remnants of a gateway to an Indebele village. The Indebele people had been living on this land for hundreds, maybe thousands of years before colonialism. And the mines, and I'd found out about this village from an old news report that I saw online, and it was very hard to find, but I kind of made a map from where I thought that it would be, and this was kind of all that I found. Little shards of Ndebele art, and nobody knows how long this village had been here. But this was all that was left of it, and and a big coal mine in the background. So I'd like that kind of idea to stick with you, that you can't really divorce colonialism, capitalism, and the situation that we find ourselves in right now. And this is another example of this. In Mpumalanga, there's always this talk about jobs. If we close down the coal mines and the power stations, there's not going to be jobs, but there's not really a lot of people with jobs in Mpumalanga anyway, and the basic infrastructure is still missing. So we have people that are forced to defecate, in handmade toilets, while here at the background, if you can see this, you have these billion dollar rand power
Sorry,
stations.
Daylin, just a second. I'm not sure if everyone can see the images. Can people see the images? Because I can't.
Nope, is it not coming through?
No, I can't.
No, it's a white screen from my side.
Okay, are you seeing anything better now?
No, it's still a white screen. Sorry, I was waiting for your presentation to start, and then I realized that you're actually showing us and we can't see anything. Nobody can see it.
Oh dear. Okay, maybe this will be better. Yes.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
excellent. Can you
fantastic.
start from the beginning, please? Just
Sure.
show us those, because
So
I think
yeah, these are the beginning images. This was the gateway to the entrance of that village. That was all that was left of it. This is the village itself. One of the houses. That was what was left. And that's the mine in the background. Yeah, and this is a shard of pottery or the art that people used to make. This is one of the shack toilets that I was talking about, sort of these handmade toilets sitting out in the fields, while here in the background you can see the big power stations. This is the Sasol Synfuels plant in Secunda. The story of this facility is very interesting, as much as it's kind of a tragic. This process, the Fischer-Tropsch process, was discovered around about the turn of the 20th century, and it was actually used in scale first by the Germans, the Nazis at least. During the Second World War, they had vast reserves of coal in the Saar Basin and the Alsace-Lorraine region. They didn't have oil to use for tanks and submarines and things like that. So this process of synthesizing petroleum out of coal was actually sort of taken by them, by the nationalist government, when sanctions were being placed in South Africa in the 1960s and the 70s for apartheid. When OPEC countries didn't want to trade with South Africa, the nationalists kind of way around that was to create Sasol. And we don't. It's not a parastatal per se anymore, and it doesn't really benefit us. I mean, it's not like the petrol that comes out of there is even cheaper for South Africans, but it's still considered a strategic key point. You can't just get in there. There's men with guns to stop you. The situation in Mpumalanga, it's not just air or climate change. Air pollution, it also affects the water, as I think you'll see in some of the other photographs. A very common tactic that I found with the companies is using tailings to hide what's actually going on behind the scenes. So this actually isn't very far away from that village that I showed you right at the beginning. The village was sort of near here, the top of the screen. But I was able to take these photographs in a plane. And when you drive by on the highways, they actually pile the tailings up higher at the edges so that a person can't see in from the ground level. They're sort of hiding what they're doing. And when I've actually spoken to some mining people afterwards that have looked at this, they've said that it's very clear that basic sort of rehabilitation and safety things that are supposed to be in place are not being done. And all of this is, kind of hidden behind this curtain of high tailings from the freeways. So people know that they're doing wrong. Let's be clear about that. And it's really about trying to make maximum profit while paying as little attention to people, to the environment as possible. It's unfathomably sad. This is an abandoned coal mine near Emelo. And you'll see that there's a man that's actually approaching that. He is a Zama, so-called Zama. He sort of towards this collapse section here, there was a crack in the earth. These guys, in order to make some sort of an income, they crawl down in there. They mine by candlelight in some places. There's sections which have collapsed and people have been trapped underneath. There's parts where the police have actually used explosives to try and block off these mine entrances that people could stop going there to try and make an income. But the only reason that it's like that at all is because when the mines left, they hadn't rehabilitated it. There's also the issue of inequality in terms of the access to electricity, because the people that often buy the coal from these Amazonas are people in the community that can't afford electricity and are still using coal stoves for heating and for cooking, like it's 100, 150 years ago. This was at a dump near the town of Bethel called Emadotini, the place of dirt. There are people that live in this dump picking out little bits of recyclables where they can. And I remember there was a boy there, his name is Sifiso, who told me, I think he was about like 12 or 13 at the time that I met him. And he said, what is the point of going to school if there's no food at home? And I mean, that is the material reality of the vast majority of people in Mpumalanga. And the idea that coal is going to provide jobs and change that is not true from my experience. These are trucks with coal lining up to feed one of the power stations. I believe that it's Duva. You'll sometimes have these trucks going on for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers behind or leading up to a power station. I mean, there's the double cost of climate-wise of the pollution from the facilities themselves, but also the pollution incurred in transporting the coal. And I think also it's quite interesting to see, like, look at how the infrastructure is even. I mean, this was a few years ago. These facilities are really not in great shape, as we've experiencing with load shedding right now. This is a dam near the township of Silobela, near Carolina in Mpumalanga. This dam is actually sulfurous acid, so runoff from acid mine drainage. The sulfur dioxide reacts with the water and becomes sulfurous acid. And the people in this community, they don't actually drink the water from the taps. It smells when it comes out the taps. And the municipality told them, no, everything is fine. But the municipality has it was recorded in the news actually that there were trucks delivering water to the municipal offices, like Valpre or bottled water, while the community was left to drink this. So there's actually just, I think, like 2 or 3 boreholes that serve the entire township now. Nobody actually drinks from the taps. This is water, polluted water coming out of Komati power station. If this was in color, you would see that it was, this middle area is obviously white, but it's got this very sickly green, yellow tinge to it at the edge. It stinks of rotten eggs, which is sulfur acid. This is a swamp. An acid swamp. So my life was actually saved here by a local. I was trying to walk around and take pictures. You'll notice that the water is totally still. It's dead. It's lifeless, and the plants that are in it are calcified with sulfur. And I almost stepped into a sinkhole. And this guy, whose name was Ngwenya, ironically, saved me. And he told me the story of how many people from that community called Leopold had actually died in there. And I mean, it's like a fate that's unimaginable, being swallowed up by sort of acidic quicksand. And nobody cares because they're poor and they live on the fringes of society, but they pay the price for our power. This image was just taken as a dust storm was approaching the farmland, and I think for me it was trying to symbolize or sum up how food security is also going to be affected by it. Mpumalanga used to be a bread basket for South Africa, and it is still in some ways, but as we run out of water and as things get hotter and hotter, it's not going to be. This is it's dead cow near the Secunda facility the Sasol Synfuels facility in Secunda, and I think it kind of just speaks to what cows symbolize in Nguni culture, those sort of values, and again this brokenness from actually what our culture is and what the land is supposed to do for us, and instead. There's this sort of looming monster in the background. So and this is it itself, the Sasol Synfuels facility. It's called Secunda because the first one was actually in Sasolburg, so that's Sasol 1. Then Sasol 2, and then a duplicate of it. So the facility in Secunda is actually double the size of the one in Sasolburg. There's a second one as a backup. was identified by Greenpeace in a report that came out a few years ago as the single highest point of greenhouse gas emissions in the world for any one facility. So yeah, I mean, of all of the facilities in the entire world, this one emits the most greenhouse gas. Specifically, I think it's sulfur dioxide, but there are a whole bunch of different gases that come out from it. This is Kusile, which is, when it's completed, it's going to be one of the biggest coal-fired power stations in the world. I mean, it's many, many, many years overdue. It's totally over budget, and it's still not working properly, which is why we're having load shedding even today. This is Komati Power Station and the town of Komati nearby to it. I don't know what this matter is, or these stains on the side of the cooling towers, but I'm doubting that it's very good. I hope it's okay if I run just a few minutes over. I prepared a couple. I hope that's all right. This is a wind blowing up soot, coal ash, and dust from a loading facility. So what happens is that we'll have big trucks, which you can see somewhere in the background here, and yeah, they line up to get coal put into them so that they can take it to the power stations. But you get varying different types of consistencies of coal. So the very fine particulate matter is not that good for burning at power stations. That goes up into the atmosphere, the air around us. And I think this is also from the air. This kind of shows the callousness, the disregard of which people are treated out there. So this is an old rehabilitated, it's still in use actually, this one, coal mine here, and this is a community at Leopold that's there. I mean, like there's blasting and things that happen, and I mean it's not just here. Places like Pola, sure, even in Amalasheni, there's plenty of blasting that happens. It terrifies children. It kicks toxins up into the air. It's yeah, it's very, very unfair. This is another settlement. It was called, it's just outside Middelburg. You can see the people here sort of living in mud and handmade houses right next to this very big facility, which actually processes some of the coal to make it ready for export, from what I understood. And there's a few pictures I'll show you just now that from inside this community itself. This is Embalenhle, which is the township outside Secunda. So this is the Sasol Synfuels plant again. It's very sad and twisted that the name of this township is Embalenhle, which means beautiful flower. But apartheid in its grand evilness, apartheid spatial planning had the township built downwind of the facility and the suburbs, the white areas, upwind. So all of the pollution from Sasol actually blows into Embalenhle, and I mean there's massive amounts of asthma, tuberculosis, cancers, all of these kind of different respiratory diseases. It's shocking. This lady, I think this is her story is kind of a great metaphor for how coal really works. This facility, that's the one that I showed you a little bit earlier on from the air. The coal trucks come in and they bring coal to be processed here, and this lady picks up the pieces that fall off the side of the truck to make a fire to cook meat for the men that work inside there. And I think that's kind of really the material reality of coal. People living for scraps of it to try and eke out a living. It's not an inclusive economy at all. This man was one of the workers at that facility, and he had suffered tuberculosis before in his life, and he almost lost his job. His wife had died from tuberculosis, And so he lived here alone. He sent his children back to the Free State where he was from, and he just sends money every month because he doesn't want them to get sick. He was really struggling. This young man, him and his father stayed in a house near a mine in Delmas, and the blasting, from the mines had actually cracked the walls of his house, and he said it very clearly that he felt abused. This lady, I saw her collecting firewood at the side of the road. I made this photograph. She was in her mid-70s, and she said that in her life, from during apartheid to the present day, which then was 2018, nothing had changed, and that's quite something. This is outside Komati Power Station, and I think this also kind of highlights the inequality. These people have never ever had electricity, even though they stay right next to a power station. This lady is also living in that community. Yeah, just a wider view of the community. It was known as Big House because it was built around this barn first. Just a few more pictures that I'd like to show you. This is underground with the so-called Zamazamas. I think that it's a travesty that what they're doing is considered illegal, when if we consider that in the Freedom Charter, the mineral resources of the land are supposed to belong to all of the people. People, instead of resorting to begging or crime, are trying to work. They want to work, but yeah, they've got no choice but to be illegal. Conditions are very harsh down there. There's no protective gear. There's no breathing apparatus. There's no support beams. Many people have died in there. There are children working there as well for similar reasons. The families don't have enough money coming in, and the young boys often feel compelled to work themselves and to try and bring some sort of income. This is the entrance to the mine. Yeah, this was one of the Zamazamas, and for each of those sacks of coal, he gets about 50 Rand. On a good day, if he has access to a wheelbarrow, he can get maybe 7 or 8. On a day when he doesn't, maybe 3 or 4. Those were his hands. So it's the feet of a child miner. She had to mine barefoot. She didn't have shoes. And then my last picture, which is the cover of the book as well. I think it kind of sums up our situation. We have, sort of electricity in the back of our minds, but we have this big looming storm coming towards us of climate change. It's here already, and the choice is in our hands how we're going to deal with this. I don't think that we can trust our leaders. I think that some sort of radical action needs to be taken because they will serve their best interests as they always have. So that's what this project Broken Land was about. And I hope that provides some sort of insight to the matters that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Wow, Daylin, those photographs, I mean, I've been looking at, the comments from on the side in the chat, they're just so powerful. And I think I just need to add, I mean, I meant to introduce you and to mention that, so that everyone knows that, Daylin's won the Ernest Cole Award for his photography for this work. And it's quite fitting that, your debut monograph is called Broken Land. And just to mention that today we talk about broken promises. That's the theme of our meeting, broken promises, because, they have it's 26 years of COP, and we've had 26 years of broken promises. And also we have a broken climate. Daylin, your work is seriously phenomenal. I mean, people are, I think there's like this, if we were in a room, there would have just been that silence of heaviness, you know. You've shown us stuff, but you've also narrated the picture, and your pictures do tell 1,000 words indeed. And so thank you, comrade. And I think, you know, I think we need to show this more often. And someone said, I hope you're doing a road show. So you should consider that as well.
Thanks. There was a physical exhibition and they asked for print. So if after COVID time, we can all get together, I would be happy.
Oh, that would be excellent. That would be fantastic. And we can even add, comrades, from the Arc of Life, some of our own individual pictures. We might not be as good as Daylin or win awards, but maybe he can advise us. So how's that for a training on photography as well? Okay, comrades, because of a few things, we're just slightly adjusting the agenda. The reason is that some of the comrades are not based in South Africa. They're actually planning to go to the march in Glasgow, and that is the next speaker. So we're going to try and do the next session, which is the Ecocide, and that would be the next session. And we're going to have Comrade Alex to do this session. Comrade Alex is from the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. But before he goes through, I'm going to hand, in fact, I think he's sitting in the COP place right now, so he can tell us a little bit about that as well. But before we hand over to him, this session will be chaired by Charles. So we're just switching the agenda a little bit. I'm going to hand over to Charles now.
Thank you very much, Maria. Alex, let me just make a disclaimer. I do not want to butcher your surname. Alex has worked as a policy analyst, as a campaigner, as an organizer, a strategist for climate justice for 15 years, with a global campaign to demand climate justice, Climate Action Network, and 350.org. He has worked on digital and electoral campaigns across the Americas, Australia, and Europe. He has a first-class degree in law from the Australian National University, a master's in economics from the Australian National University, and a master's from the Gandhi Institute for Development Research. He lives in Bogota, Colombia, with his family. Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. And Daylin, thank you so much for that starting presentation. It was very affecting, even here in the freezing cold of Glasgow. I am speaking to you all from the halls of the COP. I'm about to leave and walk out and join our comrades on the streets who are marching in, it is one of the biggest storms I've seen. The building is shaking, it's raining, but that will not deter the people, I think, taking to the streets and marching against the false solutions being promoted inside this COP, and against the spin and the greenwashing and the lies that we're seeing emanating from here. So I have been following the international climate process as an observer and activist for 11 or 12 years now. And it's been very concerning to see what I would call the complete deregulation of the international rules system on climate change. You know, in 2000s, we had what was called the Kyoto Protocol, which had its flaws, but it had binding, quantified commitments that countries needed to meet. They had to face the same rules and they had to report on it. And that was their responsibility and accountability to the international system. And then, you know, the US government under the Obama presidency wanted to be seen to be a leader on climate change, and they knew they couldn't agree to binding international legal rules because they didn't want to have to accept their historical responsibility for causing the problem, and they didn't want to have to accept an international rules-based system. And so they advocated a different approach, which became the Paris Agreement, which was where instead of having a binding legal commitment under international law, countries would come to the UN with a pledge, with a promise to do something, and then later that would be reviewed. And so it was a pledge and review system. And the idea was that Glasgow would be one of the first examples where we would review the pledges and the activities of what has been happening by governments on climate. But in Glasgow, what we've seen is instead of there being review, we're getting simply announcements. So instead of formally participating in the negotiations and making submissions into the UN under the rules-based system, governments led by the UK government as the chair are simply making announcements on the outside of the process, on the fringes of the process, announcements that we can't analyze. They aren't structured within any particular format. They don't follow any particular rules. There's no forum in which they're accountable to other nations or to civil society. And so we've gone from binding commitments to pledge and review to announcements and nothing. We don't know. And I think, comrades, you'll be aware of one such announcement, the announcement that there's $8.6 billion for a just transition mechanism in South Africa. That was announced here as an achievement of the COP. It, of course, is not present in any of the negotiations in the COP. I don't know anyone who can tell us where the money is coming from. Is it a loan? Is it purchasing carbon credits? Is it instead of some other aid? People don't know where is it going. Is it going directly to Eskom? Is it going to the Development Bank of South Africa? We don't know, and I think that's quite indicative of where these negotiations have been going. And I think our response to that from comrades globally has been a vision for how we could increase the power of our collective power and solidarity and accountability in the international as well as the national system. And so there's been a long-standing campaign for the idea of ecocide. So creating a crime for the unlawful and wanton acts where you have knowledge that they're going to cause severe and widespread damage to the environment. And there's a new campaign to start a new treaty that would have legally binding commitments around the production of fossil fuels. So not focused on the end result, the emissions, the CO2 at the end, which is used for the creative accounting and the ways that they've come up with making offsets, but instead focusing on the real processes that exist in the world of the production of coal, oil, and gas, and working out how we can build a normative standard that says there should be no new coal, oil, and gas, which is absolutely essential given the science. And then how do we negotiate and resolve the equitable phase down of the production of those products? So if we look at the case of South Africa, and we know that the production of coal is a real threat to the local livelihoods as well as to our global livelihoods, then how can we come up with a fair and real deal for the South African people and communities and workers to transition off that production? And instead of having those deals made on the sidelines of a UN talks by representative of Eskom and the US government, it actually has to happen in an accountable way before the United Nations. And so that's what the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty campaign is about. The current focus of the negotiations here in Glasgow have been particularly focused on this idea of carbon markets, which were mentioned in the beginning, which is the idea that if we can account and work out a way to create a number for the amount of CO2 that's avoided by doing a particular thing, whether that's installing a new solar panel or planting a tree, then we could sell that credit to somebody else so that they can count it against the obligation that they were supposed to fulfill. And you can, just saying it out loud, you can see how ridiculous it sounds. And you can also see how clearly it's about slowing the actual transition we need. Because instead of me acting here in Glasgow to actually reduce climate pollution, I'm instead going to pay somebody in South Africa to do something and claim the credit that way. And we're doing that at a time when we know that no further molecules of CO2 can enter our atmosphere without needing to come down. So we're really advocating at the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative for a complete change in our approach to these international negotiations, to move away from a focus on gases and press releases and announcements, to shift to focusing on the real concrete realities, focus on the getting agreement to end production, getting agreements to plan for the just transition, and getting agreements to reshape our international financial system so that it doesn't continue to perpetuate the problem. So those would be some of my reflections. I appreciate they touched on both the negotiations themselves and the broader need for a fossil fuel treaty. I hope that they were understandable. I tried not to use too many acronyms, and I will share in the link in the chat a report that was released here by the International Trade Union Confederation, Friends of the Earth, by ActionAid, 200 other civil society organizations, which is about the need for a fair phase out of fossil fuels. And it talks about some of the principles that we might need to apply, and is obviously more organized and structured than what I've been able to deliver you here.
Alex, thank you very much for your very insightful contribution. Before I open it up for discussion, we'll transition to our next speaker, Professor Vishwas Sadka. Just by way of very short introduction, Professor Sadka is an associate professor of international relations at the University of the Witwatersrand, editor of the Democratic Marxism series, and principal investigator for the Emancipatory Future Studies in the Anthropocene. He's an activist known to many of us. Prof, over to you.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks, Alex, for your input. And I'm going to build on that. So I'm going to be talking about the rise of eco-fascism, which is this volume, and I'm hoping, Charles, you can share the link so it's freely downloadable. Just very quickly for this platform, a short history of the making of the climate crisis, I think, is in order. We sometimes take for granted as activists that, we really have these things kind of mastered and we have a command of. So we have 150 years of extraction of coal, oil, and gas, and this has been driven by the global north. And of course, the UK and the US and others have benefited from this. And the US has the highest historical emissions. In the 70s, ExxonMobil knew about the climate problem, but of course it wasn't mainstreamed. And then towards the late 70s, US scientists signaled very strongly to Jimmy Carter that this was a problem, and the US Academy of Sciences needed to do more work on it. The study that was produced was buried. So James Hansen in 1988, who was there in the early 80s, raises the alarm bell again in 1988. And of course, the International Panel on Climate Change takes off. Now, today, it's a different ballgame with China and India and others leading in terms of fossil emissions. Over 50% of coal emissions comes from these countries, and South Africa has used coal for over 100 years. So it's in this context, we've got to understand those that are driving us towards climate catastrophe in this global chamber. Okay, so we have science and its dangers, but yet this forward march, if you like, of destruction and annihilation is continuing. So we've got to talk about the incoming of fascism. And we've got to think about how to locate it and situate it. And it is something that is part of capitalism historically, but we have to understand it in its particular context. We've got to recognize two moments of fascism that we've lived through in the 20th century during the interwar years, and of course, what is sometimes considered authoritarian regimes after World War II in the global South. And we've got to place this fascist tendency, this eco-fascist tendency, in the context of the current great crisis of capitalism, the fourth great crisis. And climate is at the heart of this crisis, and it is converging with other crisis tendencies. Now, who is driving the climate breakdown and taking us towards eco-fascism? I mean, if you hear all the media spin, and if you hear all the kind of diplomatic talk today and etc., you think, well, politicians and governments are solving this problem. Well, as Ferial mentioned, for over 2 decades, the multilateral negotiations has failed. We are now at 1.2 degrees Celsius, with climate extremes the new reality, and we are heading for 1.5 degrees Celsius this decade. I think it was not Gabriel, Alex referred to the kind of market mechanisms that have been central to the conversation. These are not new mechanisms. They've been there even during the Kyoto Protocol, and they've continued now into the present. These mechanisms are championed by neoliberals, and there's 2 types. They are market democrat neoliberals, and they're hard right authoritarians. So these are false solutions, and they don't want to solve the problems. Standing behind them and pulling the strings and shaping everything for over almost 3 decades has been finance capital, making money off fossil fuels, in the global north, and they've been increasingly consolidating. But there's also China, for example, transport, construction, digital. Whenever we switch on our computers, etc., and the global network of computers that runs the internet, that's using up a lot of carbon and emitting a lot of carbon, etc. So there's a different powerful forces shaping the politicians and the dominant agenda. And the dominant agenda is really about accelerating and prolonging carbon capitalism for as long as possible. So Biden, in the midst of the summit, calls on OPEC to increase supply of oil because oil prices are impacting the American consumer. But it also doesn't lock in to a phase out of coal. And about 48 countries have locked into this agreement, except South Africa as well. So it's something that we need to think about, the transparency, the lack of a proper regulatory framework to deal with these issues. It's the first time in the history of these negotiations that you have an emphasis on phasing out of fossil fuel, in this case, coal. So the business fail, and as climate extremes hit us, they're going to use approaches, they're going to use vilification, they're going to use the law to beat us back, okay? And there's already laws from the Home Security Act, the Canadians have copied that, the British have copied, to criminalize environmental justice and climate justice activists more and more, if you like, closed, so that our actions can be limited. In addition, they are building walls. If you look at the budgets of Canada, the UK, including the US, those budgets have been used also to build walls of these societies or border control regimes to keep people out. So while they are doing performances at these COP summits, etc., they at the same time are trying to build lifeboats just for their countries and for their people. And this is impacting us negatively, particularly in the global south. In Cyclone Idai and Kenneth, it was mainly African women that bore the brunt of their decisions and their failure to act and take responsibility. Geoengineering is another idea that the Gates Foundation is heavily invested in it. And it's really about a global experiment with our Earth system. And it's a role proposition. And as climate justice activists, we must reject this proposition, because you can only test this technology by putting it to work. And now we don't know what its consequences. They haven't really developed this technology up to now. So I think that's another very, very important challenge for us in the context of dominant agenda. But in the end, failure to act for almost 3 decades is leading to mass scale destruction of human and non-human life. And we call that ecocide. There's no commitment to rupture with carbon capitalism and accelerate our commitment to deep just transition. This is what the COP26 means. They cannot solve the problem and intersecting crises. And therefore, there's going to be more pain and there's going to be more harm. There's going to be eco-fascism. So to culminate this conversation with you, I put up this slide to just show you the juxtaposition, the eco-fascist politics versus the climate justice politics. And each one of us has got to understand these distinctions. When we stand for climate justice, we must know what we're standing for. So if you look at some of the outcomes that are beginning to be flagged more strongly out of this COP, the first is the phase out of coal deal by 2030. And of course, China and India have not locked in, and neither has South Africa. What if climate justice forces being saying historically? They've been saying phase out fuels available over 5,000 gigatons that can burn us all to death. And of course, the fossil fuel corporations are continuing to extract and use, etc. And as long as we don't spend on the energy transition and the deep just transition to break with it, they are going to be dominant. The second important thing that's been flagged is this 100 billion spend. But again, it's not clear whether it's loans, whether it's more debt for us in the global south, and Alex has alluded to that. But clearly, these targets haven't been met. They've signaled since 2009, they are not willing to put money into assisting countries in the global south. We haven't caused this problem. We actually need at least $50 trillion to really finance this global transition. They spent more on wars, like the war era, 8 trillion. Reserve banks have bailed out finance houses, etc., for about 20 trillion. They're not willing to pay the climate debt for historical emissions, okay? And that means, of course, that they must quantify and work and happen quickly. They're talking about protecting forests by 2030, and of course, on paper, it looks really good, but really, when the detail is scrutinized, they're talking about industrial tree planting. They're talking about carbon, we plant the trees, etc. They're not addressing essentially the financing that's driving the destruction of political economy for like hamburgers and so on in the global north that are leading to the destruction of the Amazon forest. So again, these are not solutions that really help us. On the other hand, climate justice forces have been calling for natural climate solutions from below as the deep just transition, defend the commons, indigenous cultural restoration, community-led biodiversity registers, national bioregions, food sovereignty. These are the solutions that will defend and protect biodiversity. These kind of band-aid measures around the COP agenda. None of what's coming through is legally binding in terms of the Paris Climate Agreement, so governments can easily withdraw from any of these agreements. But essentially, the nationally determined commitments to 2.7 degrees heating, according to the UN. So essentially, they are taking us towards climate catastrophe. What we are arguing for in response to all of this and fighting for is national climate justice projects in our countries for deep decisions. And that means we've got to tackle all the dimensions of the climate challenge. And to conclude, comrades, this is why we need mass politics. We gave the Climate Justice Charter to our parliament a year ago, ignored us. We're going back to parliament on Tuesday, and we hope that all of you who are in Cape Town, who have friends, who have family, comrades, please ask them to join us to stand in front of parliament and shake up parliament. At the heart of this, comrades, is what are we going to do next? What's next for the Climate Justice Charter movement? How do we move beyond critique and trying to lobby these useless politicians to accelerate and deepen the just transition from below? We have to answer that question. We have to figure out that question, because we've got to take our politics beyond symbolism and talk and rhetoric. We've got to be driving solutions to this problem. And at the same time, how do we build a mass movement? 260 organizations, and many of you are here today, support the Climate Justice Charter. How do we take this to the next level towards mass climate justice policy? Give you these questions, comrades. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vish. As I said in the chat, if you have any comments or questions, you can raise your hand and I will allow you to speak. We want to make the webinar as interactive as possible. Or alternatively, you can post your comments or questions in the chat. But if you want to speak, then you can raise your hand and I will allow you to speak. Just from me to both Vish and Alex, I'm just thinking of a book by Andres Malm on how to blow up a pipeline. And my question really is centered on if we are seeing the micromanagement of democracy, and if the nationally determined contributions are leading us to 2.7, as the UN says, what is the likelihood of climate armed resistance? And what will this mean for climate justice? I'm putting it to both Vish and Alex.
Yeah, you know, I think there's going to be a wide range of responses to the crisis that we're facing. You know, I personally disavow violence and the use of violence, but we are going to see, I think, in different places, different communities reacting in different ways to the pressures that they're put under. That's a reality of the heating world that we're in, and I think it will also be a reality of a world that is wrecked by an instability that's exacerbated by there being no plan for the transition from the production of fossil fuels, which is the underlying element of our international financial trade and production systems, to new sources of energy, and the disrupting effect that that will have for, you know, there are 400 million people who live in countries where over 50% of national revenue comes from oil rents. If that's to drastically decrease this decade, I think we would risk seeing huge amounts of instability and violence. And we're already seeing climate impacts in terms of change for weather events, in heat, driving impacts on crops, also contributing to sources of conflict. So I think there's no doubt that that climate change itself is going to be a driver of violence. And there's no doubt that the international system currently existing also uses violence to enforce the existing structures of power and interests. And I think we may well see violence from some communities and people as part of the response.
Vish, you're breaking
It's an
up
excellent
a bit.
question, and to add, Pentagon. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes, I can hear you now.
The Pentagon has advanced thinking on this problem, abrupt climate change, etc. And, you know, it's very much part of their framework about this problem. More recently, to also think about this problem, and they talk about it as threats to national security. They talk about it as threat multipliers, etc. But it's clear that in the context of the war, terror, and so on, they have passed laws, very serious surveillance laws, etc., that they are basically using in the context of various grassroots struggles. You've seen it during Standing Rock struggles, when people's movements were rising, and they use all kinds of technologies, the FBI, etc., to deal with them. So there is capacity, and there is political into the side of ruling class to use the coercive apparatus to deal with us. But I think if we play the game the way they want us to play it, which is to fall into panic, because this is all about elite panic. If we end up with popular panic, that will give them a pretext and a reason to deal with us. And we must not give them that reason. We need to be thinking very, very differently about our And I've said this on other elections. First time in the modern history of democracies. The American election was a climate election. The German election was a climate election. The Norwegian election was a climate election, and so on. Election in South Africa in 2024. It's a fundamental challenge for us as climate justice and environmental justice and social justice forces. That election is also going to be happening in the context of the crisis of national liberation politics and the crisis of our democracy. And so we really have to think carefully about that. And the last point I'll make is that we have to think about our climate just dimensions of the crisis that we face. The Charter talks about democratic systemic reforms, and we have 14 systemic alternatives in the Charter that can make a difference. If we have politicians and we have the power structure, if we look at taking forward that vision at a policy level, we will have a different kind of society. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Vish. Marcus Solomon, your hand was up. I've allowed you to speak. Thanks.
Thank you very much, comrade. I just want to say thank you for the Climate Justice Network Forum campaign movement for organizing this event. I just want to start off by agreeing what Vish is saying, and also say that the next step then is to up our efforts to build that mass movement based on peace, friendship, and solidarity. If there's anything that's going to take us through this crisis, it's a struggle for survival now. It'll be that solidarity on the ground. And I'm from the children's sector. We've started building a children's movement, which we see as an important part of that broad movement. It's absolutely essential. Youth, children, and I see our women playing a crucial part, as they have already done in places like Colombia and all parts of the world. So I just want to say that we have to build that mass movement, and every effort must be made to do that. And we mustn't fall, and I want to agree with that, the trap of just reacting. We need to have a very proactive program, because not only about saving the world, but also start healing it. And we've had some very interesting programs around that. So once again, thank you very much. And I think that the children's movement has played a crucial role, although small, but I think crucial, because really it's about their survival in the context of the survival of nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Avik.
Thank you very much. Alex says you can only take one more question and then you'll have to leave. Are there any quick questions or comments to Alex so that we can let him go? Yes, Dr. Karen. Dr. Karen, please unmute.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Comrade Chair. My question is really to Alex. These announcements that are being made on the site, when the president announced this week that there's that billions of money that has been, I'm not sure whether you are saying donation or what. So there's no free lunch. So I just want to check with Alex Hore. Once they have donated this money, I'm not sure, it's not a donation, and what are we going to do? What are they going to do? Because it looks like there are no discussions. It's just a friendly announcement by the wayside, which is really frustrating. And there was a webinar where the business was just discussing this year for how is the COP26 going to be funded for South Africa. It looked like they are accepting it or no, it's fine, it's good. And Kosatu was on that panel. They were saying, no, there's going to be green work created for our workers. I don't see it any time that happening. They're delaying our processes. I agree with Professor Comrade Vish that the 2024 elections should all be about climate change, because we are deep in. Thank you very much. I'm not sure how we go forward, Alex, with this one of money that they're buying
Yeah.
people with.
It's a very good question, and it's the same question that I have, because we don't know. So we assume that that money is in the form of loans, but we have not been able to get detail about it, about what the terms and conditions of the loans are. We, as I said, maybe they think that they're going to get offset credits from it and counted against the climate action they're supposed to be taking at home. We don't know, and it's because they didn't announce it in their formal commitments under the UN Convention on Climate Change. They simply made a press release on the side and haven't exposed themselves to any scrutiny or accountability. So that's now the job that we must take up as civil society, to keep asking these questions and to try to really understand and see, could it be something that does actually make some sort of change and help drive a shift in the structure of the economy? Or is it going to be conditional loans that limit the policy space of incoming governments, that don't involve workers, and that create offsets for rich countries to keep polluting? You know, that's the nightmare scenario. And I think our part of our efforts should be on focusing on trying to make sure that it's new and additional resourcing that doesn't have hidden clauses, and that the planning for it, because we also don't know where it's going, the planning for it is truly done in a consultative way, in social dialogue with the impacted communities, and then the money itself goes to things that people need, you know, addresses the needs, real needs to bring people out of poverty, where poverty in general, and energy poverty, of course, and find meaningful work, and not simply be some sort of corporate bailout of Eskom's, you know, corporate debts. So I'm sorry I don't have better answers for you. I have been asking the same questions since we saw the announcement. If we've got a couple of South African colleagues trying to research it, if others on this call know more, let us share it. But I think part of our joint efforts are going to need to be asking those questions.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you very much.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please.
Charles?
Please,
Yeah,
Rich, go
so
ahead.
comrades, I think what we must keep in view that this Eskom challenge has been in the making for a long time. And, you know, of course, we inherited this carbon-based coal energy driven government has cranked it up. Okay, so some investments into some of the largest coal-fired power stations in the world, in a context in which they've really banned even these big coal-fired power stations have been tied into corruption, including Eskom more generally. We have an aging coal fleet, and, you know, a coal-fired power station lasts about 30 years, etc. And so they haven't really planned all of this in. So we've been in a crisis management mode around Eskom and the energy crisis. So they are scrambling around. I mean, this through climate diplomacy is part of this crisis management approach. It's based on a clear, conscious strategy to take. We've got to keep that in perspective. To that, of course, is our national energy mix. I mean, our mix locks us into coal till 2030. And even by then, coal declined to 60% of our national energy mix. So it's not as though a climate financing deal, which, and I agree with Alex, we're not clear about the details and the modalities. It's not as though it's actually going to probably help the funding and the financing of decommissioning largely or old coal fleet, but it's not that it's going to decarbonize. It's not given that it's going to accelerate the deep just transition. Thanks.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Alice. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. No, I just wanted to ask about the fossil fuel subsidies. The IMF said that last year 450 billion was spent globally on fossil fuel subsidies. And what's been done at the COP to end these fossil fuel subsidies? And then my second point is that often these commitments are way down the line, you know, for 2050, it's a long way away. We need commitments for next year, you know, at least to keep emissions the same, maybe from this year to next year, that we peak and then start to decline. The commitments are always so far away, you know. We need commitments that are, what are we going to do next year? What's achievable, and how can we plan for that? Thanks.
Thank you so much,
Sure.
Comrade Alice. Vish, over to you.
I just want to check, has Alex left us? Okay. So,
Yes, he's left
so
us.
Alice, I don't have a direct response to you around how the IMF sort of research and numbers around subsidies. Just thing that they put on the agenda was the phase out of coal. But even that, I mean, has to be scrutinized in terms of subsidies, in terms of financing, etc. It's not clear. I mean, many journalists have pointed out that the 48 countries that have locked into it, and the UK government says about 96 or something, not all of them are countries. Some of them are international organizations, etc., etc. So, I mean, this is the point that Alex was making. If you have a proper phase out of coal, then you can really measure and you can assess and you can scrutinize things at a very granular level. You can quantify what level of finance is now, etc., etc. So basically, I mean, I think what we are faced with is, again, performative politics around climate in the COP process, and it's very problematic. I mean, I agree with you fully that the moment of where we are right now needs immediate sort of responses. And I think this is the problem with the COP. I mean, you know, the discourse around 2050 and net zero is highly problematic, and it's reinforcing this eco-fascist policy agenda that I've been alluding to. Carbon markets, offsets, mono-industrial tree farming, etc., REDS, things that many of us have critiqued over the years, things that have been there, that climate justice activists have taken shots at, etc., for many years, are still in the mainstream agenda. And net 50 or carbon neutrality, this whole discourse really is very misleading, and it continues and delays decisive action. And we've got to reject it. And that is why we've got to come back to a climate justice project for the country. We are beyond lobbying, and it does impact on society, even if it doesn't impact on decision makers. It impacts on society, but we must go way beyond that. And we've got to have.
Thank you so much, Comrade Fish. Comrade Marcus, is this a new hand or an old one? I'm not sure.
It's a new hand. Is it okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. My addition to this discussion, comrades, is that I think we must focus on building the mass movement so that we can set the agenda, the pace, because what is very clear, these people are not IMF, world governments, world forums where the capitalists are strong. They are not setting, they are just diverting our efforts what we should do is to build that movement so we can take decisions and build a necessary pole that can determine what we want to do and what we can do. Because we're always speculating about what are they planning about the billions of rand they're going to invest. They've done that since the Paris conference and nothing happens. In fact, I believe it's become a tactic to slow and undermine what people are struggling for and about. Thank you. Thank you, all right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Comrade Marcus. There's a question in the chat from Mashishi. Will the new trend of reviving coal used by European countries going to hamper the campaign for renewables?
Policy solutions. Charles, just a short answer on this one. I mean, what we are seeing in the world right now is the increase in prices of fossil fuels. And so oil, particularly through OPEC. And so many European governments, not just European governments, many governments are now recoiling and they're trying to manage this crisis. And so they're leaning back on fossil fuels, coal, etc. What it is revealing, which is what the International Energy Agency has told the world before the COP, that even countries that are committed to just transitions and so on are not investing adequately in renewable energy systems. And I'll go further, investing in community-owned energy systems. The International Energy Agency says there's a major gap in investments, and that has to be more than tripled if we are really going to sort of move in the direction that we need and break with carbon-based energy systems. And the fact that, you know, the rupture hasn't happened with carbon-based energy systems and economics generally, and economies generally. So again, you know, we're sitting almost 3 decades later, still talking about the crisis. The science is raising very loud, and 15 till now, the science has confirmed we are living in a new world, a world of climate extremes, droughts, more extreme heat waves, your live reality. And despite that, this COP is also exposing the failure to take the climate science seriously and live reality. So I agree fully with the sentiment that we have to build, and we have to build a strong, mass-based, strategic movement that can navigate the crisis that's coming.
Thank you very much, Comrade Vish. Comrade Alice, I'm not sure if that is a new hand or an old one. Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, sorry, that was an old hand, sorry.
Oh, all right, thank you very much. Comrades, if there are no further questions or comments, I will give over to Comrade Vish to make his closing remarks for this session. And then I'll hand over to Awande to chair the next one on climate and broken promises. Thank you.
And worsening. Sorry, Charles, you want closing remarks?
Yes, please, on this session, Vish. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, comrades, thank you for all your inputs and so on. I mean, I think this is just the start. It's clear that what's coming out of this COP has to be critically scrutinized. And I think it was really valuable to have Alex with us to reinforce the idea that there's a lot of opaqueness, there's no clarity, and we still don't know full details. There's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of hard talk about taking this climate problem seriously and so on. And where we can kind of work things out, it's clear that, again, this COP summit is really not delivering the kind of requisite and proportional response to the crisis. This means, comrades, we shoulder a bigger responsibility and a bigger political challenge. And we've got to go beyond just individuals. We've got to go beyond just lobbying. We got to go beyond just talking about the urgency and the science. We've got to build this powerful collective movement, comrades. And now is the time. Thanks for coming, but there's more exciting stuff coming. Let's hear from the young people.
Thank you very much. Yes, there's a lot of exciting stuff coming with our next session, Broken Promises and the Broken Climate. This session will be chaired by Awande Buteles. Awande, I'll hand over to you. Thank you. Awande?
Hi, sorry, I'd frozen there for a second. Thank you, Charles. And now I'll be introducing our 4 youth panelists who will be speaking on this session of Broken Promises. And I'll begin with the first 2. Lindsay Majola, a 13-year-old grade 7 Greensbury Primary School activist in Phoenix, KZN. And Trisha Sorio, who represents the Phoenix Child Welfare. Those will be our first speakers. Next, we have Gabriel Klaassen, an intersectional activist from Project 90 by 2030 and African Climate Alliance. And finally, we have Matthew Wingfield, a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Stellenbosch. Thank you for joining us, and we'll begin with Lindsay and Trisha. Sorry, each speaker will have 3 minutes.
Greetings to all. My name is Lindsay Majola, and I'm from Green Bay Primary School in KwaZulu-Natal. Today, I will enlighten you on the importance of the youth in fighting environmental issues. Climate change has always been here, but as each day passes, it is getting worse. The UK government's 25-year plan for the environment is truly underwhelming and does very little to help people and the planet now. As the UK has left the EU, strong nature laws are more important than ever, with Climate Earth taking the government to court for a 3rd time over illegal levels of air pollution and plastics threatening the life in our seas. Our environment needs real action. The 25-year environmental plan gives us some idea as the government's nature protection plans, but none of these policy commitments are underpinned by law. Climate Earth Director of Programs, Carla Hill, once said, the 25-year plan makes the right noises about how our environment will be protected in the coming years, but it makes no solid commitments to new law, and it lacks any detail about how we will enforce environmental laws once we leave the EU. So after so many years and after so many broken promises, the Earth is still in danger. We as humans have made so many promises to the Earth, but sadly, most of them have not been fulfilled. Right now, we're up against the biggest environmental threats that our generation or any generation has ever faced. Wildlife we love, like elephants, turtles, and polar bears, are at risk from effects of climate change, pollution, and overconsumption. There are clear solutions to fix our broken planet. Our home needs everyone to act on it now. Here are some of the promises you could make and the impact your choice will have on the planet. Did you know by 2050, there could be more plastic in the sea than fish? By no longer using a plastic knife or fork with your lunch each working day of the year, you could personally save 466 items of unnecessary plastic. It is also estimated that 2.5 billion coffee cups are thrown away in the UK each year. That's 7 million a day. By using a reusable coffee cup, you could prevent 233 cups going to landfill each year. One of our problems are also petrol cars. Most of the 30 million plus vehicles on our roads produce emissions that exacerbate climate change and are harmful for us to breathe. Electric power eliminates exhaust pipe emissions, meaning cleaner air for us and the Earth. We throw away 7 million tons of food and drinks per year. Waste has a carbon footprint of just 6 kilograms. Sending the same amount to a landfill through your bin produces 100 times that amount, equivalent to driving a car for 24 hours. Another problem we have is that livestock require a vast amount of land, water, and feed. Shockingly, the South African food supply alone is linked to the potential extinction of approximately 33 species. Eating plant-based foods can reduce your carbon and water footprint and help safeguard wildlife. Starting your own environmental organization can also help. There are many successful youth-led environmental organizations. There are several things to do, such as recycling. Recycling can reduce the amount of garbage that ends up at a dump site. As climate change gets worse, it is us, children, and young people of today who will face the worst effects. But instead of being seen as victims, we have stood strong and began to fight back climate change. We must demand a greater involvement from the governments to fight climate change, whether through education, technology, science, or law. Young people from all over the world have stood strong to fight climate change. From time to time, the youth are given opportunities to speak about climate change. Letting the youth engage in climate problems helps them voice their opinions in order to save our own future. Young people have participated in cleanup drives, all by tree planting, garbage picking, and recycling. The youth have contributed to saving our planet. We are the future, and we are here to show the world we are stronger than we will ever know, because this is our future we are fighting for, and we will surely succeed. There are many broken promises, but it is our chance to make them come true. This is our planet, and this is our job to protect it. If we don't, we will lose our only home. So as human beings, we need to come together and save our home. We can truly do this. We don't want our only home to end up as a wasteland. So please, join me in fighting for a brighter future for us all. Thank you. I am Lindsay.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I forgot to add that Lindsay is a head prefect at the school, part of the school debating team, has developed a passion for ecological studies and part of the food garden project at Greenbury Primary. Lindsay also believes that environmental studies should become a fixture in schools in order to expose the youth to the dangers the earth is facing. I think we're all as taken by Lindsay's message, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations. I just forgot to add that following Tricia, we also have Janice. Janice is a 20-year-old student, third-year maths and physics student at UKZN from Chatsworth. And we also have Unomhle. Unomhle is representing the children's movement in Philippi, Nomhle Kiti. So after Tricia, we will have Janice, then Unomhle, Gabriel, and then Matthew. Thank you, Tricia.
Good afternoon to one and all. My name is Trisha Soroya, and I will be enlightening you on broken promises and broken climate. So the Conference of the Parties, COP21 in Paris in 2015 agreed to keep global heating well below 2 degrees Celsius, ideally no more than 1.5 degrees. The Conference of Parties, COP26, the annual meeting of countries signed up to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, takes place from 31st October to 12th November 2021. NASA announced that 2020 was likely the planet's hottest year on record. The average global temperatures in 2020 was 1 degree Celsius, warmer than in 30-year average between 1951 and 1980. We are catastrophically far from the crucial goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and yet governments everywhere are still accelerating the crisis, spending billions on fossil fuels. Global warming to 1.5 degrees is vital to reducing the risk of catastrophic natural disasters and weather events. Global leaders have spent months committing to make this happen, but the United Nations released a report showing that their actions are falling short. The 2021 Production Gap Report compares government plans for coal, oil, and gas production to the levels required to limit warming under the Paris Climate Agreement. Researchers looked at 15 major producers of fossil fuels, including Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, Germany, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Norway, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and the US. We found that most of these governments have significant policies in support of fossil fuels, and that many are planning to increase their production. These 15 countries, the reports are found, are planning to produce roughly 110% more fossil fuels in 2030 than what can be done to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. The projected production levels are 45% higher than what's needed to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius. The burning of fossil fuels is one of the main contributors to human-caused climate change. The activity has increased the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide, which is one of several greenhouse gases that trap heat within the atmosphere, warming the planet over time. We support the Climate Justice Charter. The Climate Justice Charter is campaigning food for sovereignty and climate justice, grassroots-based, endorsed by many organizations, is not serving the interests of a few, but the majority, especially marginalized. Our president and parliament needs to adopt the charter. We need visionary leadership. As citizens across the planet, we urge you to face up to climate change emergency for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Lindsay and Trisha. And next we will have Janice, who will be representing the Active Citizens Movement, is a youth rep, and will also give us their 3-minute input. Thank you, Janice. Hi, Janice. I think you might still be on mute. Okay, there you are.
Hi, sorry. Okay. For the youth, the future is very daunting. We feel the pressure of our coal reliance, and I'm very thankful for all the activists here who have continued to play a role in these causes. The youth sees the hypocrisy where our government continuously promised to take climate change issues seriously, but have been pushing our estimated goal dates further ahead, which shows their lack of commitment to our future. And in our schools, we need to be taught the truth of the matter so that we can accurately deal with it. And the truth is that the global economy, or the global north, is the greatest contributor to carbon emissions, not the populations of Africa. And we need to be taught that the dangers of capitalist ideas without regulation. We need to be taught to spot propaganda that seeks to further and support corporations' goals. And I truly believe that we need strong regulations and laws on those who go above normal amounts of environmental harm, and to normalize criminalization of those who basically kill the planet. However, for the youth of SA, for the next few years, we could have opportunities to hopefully and more actively reduce broken promises. And with this climate financing, procedures are yet to be mapped out, but I don't think it will be enough to solve 100% of our problems. And naturally, we have to ensure that our government, which is plagued by corruption, does not mess up these opportunities for us. And we have to stay in the loop and push them to focus on viable green energy science and innovation. I believe that school students should be a focus for that social change, where we really ingrain climate understanding into younger generations in the syllabus so that it becomes their second nature for their choices and thoughts. Our future generations need to be made okay with natural solutions to the climate problems, such as natural, indigenous, and community-based methods of farming. And I also think that the government can encourage this by putting money into NSFAS or NRF funding to develop required skills in people that will support tangible work in a large and varied spectrum of climate-focused jobs. such that we can successfully transition to clean energy. I would ideally like to see a small science-driven sector in the Department of Environment, Fishing and Forestry that deals with climate optimization problems, which means that their job would be to see that human activities and wild spaces, which basically terraform our planet, can maintain a balance. And it would be a massive relief for the youth to have to kill two birds with one stone and have the creation of more green jobs for the large group of unemployed youth. So I implore anyone who is capable to come up with the social and scientific academic research, community plans, or proposals so that we can make this a reality. And let me end there. Thank you for allowing us to share.
Thank you, Janice. Next, can we please have Unomhle from the children's movement? And sorry, for every speaker, if you can just please keep your camera on while you're speaking so that we can see you when you're speaking, and then you can turn it off again once you're done speaking. Thank you, Janice. And next we have Unomhle.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Okay, my name is Nomhle Giti and I am from the children's movement. Basically, I was born in the movement, but now I am a member of staff. I'll be talking about the broken promises. My topic will be job creating. It goes as follows. The government has promised the youth of our country jobs. We heard the government saying they will create jobs, but we haven't seen anything. In the State of the Nation in February 2010, the government said now is the time to lay the groundwork for strong growth going forward. But we still have so much youth unemployment. There are children who finish school with good results, yet they are still unemployed. So where is this time that our government is talking about? So when all these things lead to poverty, and poverty leads to unemployment, and unemployment leads to crime, because once the youth don't have jobs or they don't have anything to do, the only thing they think about is crime so that they can have stuff. So I think, yes, the government is giving out 350, but that is not enough for the whole family and for the whole month. So job creation in our country is something that is huge, and also poverty. Unemployment and poverty goes hand in hand. So our government really needs to do something about creating jobs for the youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that input, Nomhle. And next we have Gabriel.
Greetings all. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. First of all, I'd like to thank the young people that spoke before me, as well as the other panelists today. I think I've learned quite a bit myself, and I'm looking forward to learning more after I've spoken. In essence, what I want to just mention today is that for far too long have young people been promised a future that will be just, a future that will take into account our environmental rights, our social rights, and economic rights as well. But for far too long have those promises been broken. And unsurprisingly so. We're told that our voices matter, but then we're left away from the conversations. And then there's opportunities like this where we can engage, but this is one of the many steps that we need to make sure we take. For example, right now at COP26 in Glasgow, there are many young people who aren't provided the opportunity to speak. Many young Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are being left away from the platforms. And I think that's something that's really telling, the fact that for for the world to move forward with a just future, with system change, we have this notion that we'll actually achieve it, but no one in power, no decision makers or so empower, quotation marks, are actively making efforts to ensure that young people's voices are heard. I'm from, as I mentioned earlier, Project 90 by 2030 and African Climate Alliance, both of which are social and environmental justice organizations. But, if I weren't a part of those organizations, would I have a voice? And yes, if I did have a voice, would my voice be heard? And I think that's something that our governments, not just South African governments, but specifically in this case, South African government, doesn't really see value in. Young people have been used as tokens for far too long. And now that we're being acknowledged because young people are wanted in the spaces so that you can say, cool, we have the young person's voice. It's become a tick box exercise. And they found new and inventive ways to use our voices for their advantage. But what they don't seem to realize is that young people understand this. Young people know that we are being used. Young people know more than what they think we understand. And I think what you've noticed today is just in the conversations before me, is that young people actually, want change. It's just the platforms in which we are able to be heard are not often there. So I think I won't ramble on for too long, but I definitely want to add into the fact that we know what we want for our future. We know how important it is that we achieve that future, and we achieve it very soon, because if we don't, it's complete waste of everyone's time. But we also understand that we can't do it alone. This needs to be an intergenerational movement, an intersectional movement, one that encounters and actually brings forward the fact that social justice is environmental justice, is economic justice. We have to realize that nothing can be done in silos, that we can't work in our silos, that different movements, coalitions, initiatives have to work together from different aspects of civil society, from community to labor to youth. We need to ensure that when we move forward, that we move forward with the most vulnerable at the forefront, not so that they can be heard, but so that they can have their voices heard. Because for far too long have they been suppressed. For far too long have the marginalized been marginalized. Hopefully from today onward, we start realizing that, young voices, especially young female voices, are supposed to be elevated. I just want to leave it at that. I think that's far more that what I want to say has been said already. We need to realize that the time for change is now. If we don't take that change, we've given up on our future before it's even begun. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. The time for change is now. And now we bring on our final speaker, Matthew Wingfield.
Hi, everyone. I'm here with colleagues, fellow students from Stellenbosch University. The one day just confirmed you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Thank you.
Cool. Yes, I just want to say thank you to the previous speakers as well. Obviously, the contributions by all the speakers and the youth have been so valuable and so important. And as Gabriel was saying at the end, don't let anyone tell you, any adult tell you that your voice and your opinion and your perspective is not valuable. It's extremely valuable, and that's the purpose of this section of today's workshop. But I just wanted to touch on, like Gabriel also says, there's not much to be said, and the speakers today have covered it, but also regarding broken promises. I think a lot of us put our hope in meetings like COP, worldwide events like COP and so on, but we've seen that in the past, these events haven't been as fruitful as we've hoped. And it's always this perspective that, don't worry, the government will figure it out. We're going to go to the big meeting and we'll come up with answers. And a lot of people, I think, have thought that the 8 billion in funding is something that's going to, rocket us to a better enforce a just transition and so on. But in very many ways, as history has told us, it probably won't. So the importance is, I think, of not looking at these huge conferences and hoping for the answer or for them to save us, presidents and leaders and so on. But understanding, firstly, what's happening on the ground. I think Daylin's presentation was extremely important, showing us the realities on the ground. It's not only about these events and talking about climate finance and more policy documents, but what's actually happening on the ground. And we should never forget that. The realities and the lives that are going to be affected by this. We should never forget that. And I think sometimes when you talk to the governments and so on, this is missing from the conversation. But an important part, I think, is when these officials get back from COP, whatever position that they're in, they should be held accountable. And that's not really done to a level that is sufficient. So that's something that we've come up as a group. We want to understand and we want to press the importance of politics and understand what is the role of politics, and we need leverage, political mobilization and so on, and social mobilization. So I think the events like this are important, but also the mobilizations that we will be having on Tuesday, and other mobilizations where we build the movement together and build solidarity. I think that's absolutely crucial. We should not wait for these officials to come up with solutions. We should be part of that conversation and force the conversation. It's not only citizenry, it's not about being passive. We should be active. So I would leave with saying we should all understand our role and our position and the importance of our perspective, but also the importance of being engaged citizens and being very vocal about what we're doing and what we want as a just future as the youth. But also, it's not only about government, it's about every institution. So what we've done at Stellenbosch, we've tried to push our institution to take seriously the Climate Justice Charter, and that's happening to some degree, but as much as they've tried to silence us, we're going to keep pushing. And we should do that at all institutions. We shouldn't just wait for the government. But we're very encouraged and we're very motivated. I guess these events are always motivating, but the importance of these events is the action that follows. So keep motivated and keep active. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I want to thank Matthew and all our speakers who've spoken today on this panel, who are probably the most important voices for us to hear from, particularly in this time when we're hosting this session, this event, our CJCM Alternative to COP26. I think that a lot of people get lost in all the glitz and glamour and the big names of all these events that happen around climate. But I think, just to echo the words of our final speaker there, that it's about what's happening on the ground, it's about what's happening in communities, it's about the work that people are doing where they are. And for everyone who's here today and all our speakers, I'd like to just extend a great amount of thanks for your words, for the work that you're doing, and the courage with which you have to carry yourself forward in fighting this fight. And with that, I would like to hand over to Vish for our next panel.
Thank you. Thank you to our great panelists that just ended now. Amazing insights, powerful arguments, and very inspiring. And the crucial issues to act now. And this is what this panel is all about. So we have the charter. It's a very, very important document. It's a politically orientating vision. But we also now need to translate the charter into active tools and policies to accelerate and drive the deep, just transition from below. So we have three inputs. The first is going to be around building food sovereignty pathways. The charter calls for us feeding ourselves through food sovereignty. So we've been busy trying to put together a set of learning resources. And this is going to be led by Charles Simane. We'll then get an input from Awande Buthelezi around the climate justice deal that we're busy with. And there's been a lot of work on that, and we're just going to test a few ideas with you today. We want to present an alternative to the climate modernization and carbon nationalism of the government in terms of where the macroeconomy should go. And then we're going to have an input by Ferial Adam, who's been working on an activist tool to get us organized, to shape people's plans. The first systemic alternative in the charter is for people's plans, democratically developed by people in communities, in workplaces, etc. The climate bill that's coming is about planning. And so we want to position the climate justice charter movement so we can shape these plans to decarbonize our workplaces, manage climate risk, and so on. So that's what's coming up. And so this is about rising to the challenge now. Charles, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fish. I just want to start by sharing an animation which speaks directly to what we want to do with the Food Sovereignty Hub building tool. So let me just share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you.
We can't hear though, Charles. We can't hear. Charles, we can't hear.
Okay, let me just turn up the volume.
Peruvian-born Dr.
A little louder.
His book, Agroecology, The Science of Sustainable Agriculture, was
Can you
published
hear
in
now?
1987.
A little bit.
According to Dr. Altieri, agroecology aims Let's feed ourselves. For a very long time, small-scale farmers around the world have been practicing what we now call agroecology. The term agroecology was initially defined and developed by Peruvian-born Dr. Miguel Altieri. His book, Agroecology, The Science of Sustainable Agriculture, was published in 1987. According to Dr. Altieri, agroecology aims to re-empower peasant farmers, who produce well over half of the world's food, using 25 to 30% of the agricultural land, 30% of the water, and 20% of fossil fuels used in agriculture, with almost no chemical inputs. How do they do it? Through polyculture, a complex ecological system of multi-cropping that has evolved organically over thousands of years. In parts of Asia, polyculture involves not only crops, but also includes insects, birds, worms, and fish. By comparison, monoculture-based agribusiness is wasteful, inefficient, poisonous, and destructive. Industrial monoculture is a major contributor to climate change and is also implicated in soil degradation, the destruction of ancestral farming systems, and the exploitation of farm workers. It's a political issue that affects us all. We urgently need to democratize the food system. Consumers are not helpless pawns on a chessboard. We must defend our right to make healthy, informed food choices. And small farmers around the world should have access to and more control over land, seeds, markets, and scientific and indigenous knowledge. The idea of food sovereignty lies behind regenerative agriculture, permaculture, agroecology, and holistic land management. All of these approaches work in harmony with nature. They build on local cultures, they promote justice for farm workers, they protect ecosystems, and they combat climate change by restoring soil and biodiversity. Meet South African agroecology and permaculture expert John Zira. You can listen to him on COPAC's agroecology workshop videos. For more info, go to sources at the end of this video. If you are thinking of starting your own agroecology garden, here are 10 basic principles that you should follow.
Mother Earth is now in pain, needs our help and love to restore herself again. Mother Earth is now in pain, needs our help and love to restore herself again.
Healthy soil has its own nutrients and natural systems to provide a good growing environment. Begin by observing and recording all of the features in your chosen garden site. Take note of how much sun, wind, and rain the site gets, and especially the quality of the soil.
Mother Earth is now in pain, needs our help and love to restore herself again. Mother Earth is now in pain, needs our help and love to restore herself again.
Good luck with your food garden project. But before we get back to work, let's just remind ourselves once more of the 10 basic principles of agroecology.
Mother Earth is now in pain, needs our help and love to restore herself again. Mother Earth is now in pain, needs our help and love to restore herself again.
That small that short animation sort of it summarizes what we want to do with the food sovereignty hub building tool. Because when you look at South Africa's food system, which is reflective of the food system globally, it's not working. It's leading to more and more people who are hungry. A surprising stat is that in 2020, the year when so many people were starving, in South Africa, we had agricultural exports that were reaching $10.4 billion, a record high number of exports. Now, these record high numbers of exports were happening in the same year when so many people were starving. We know that 14 million people are food stressed. We know that COVID has accelerated that, has exponentially increased that number. So we need to build a different food system from below. So the Food Sovereignty Hub building tool is a bottom-up tool. It's made up of case studies from activists who are doing the work on the ground. It's made up of activists from rural areas, from peri-urban areas, from towns and cities. It's from people who have learned from practice. So what we want to do with this tool is to share it with many different communities on how they can build food sovereignty pathways where they live, because the current food system is just perpetuating inequality, it's perpetuating hunger. And our current agricultural system is unsustainable, especially in a heating world. We can no longer allocate 60% of our water to monocultural industrial agriculture that is so water intensive. We need a new form of farming, agroecological farming, based on the principles of regenerative agriculture, based on the principles of living soil. It's living up to what the Charter calls for us to feed ourselves through food sovereignty. So this food sovereignty hub building tool is made up of all of these activities, and many of the colleagues, some of the colleagues here have contributed to that tool. We are still accepting other contributions on how to build food sovereignty hubs in pathways, bottom up, and how to change and democratize our food system and how to own our food commons. Because the tool is not based on making agriculture more profitable. Instead, the tool is based on farming to feed people. It's based on understanding food as a commons rather than food for marketization and for profit. So the tool is ongoing and we are working on it. And I'm still encouraging other activists who want to be part of this hub building tool to contact me so that we can share their own food sovereignty hub building experiences, wherever they are, whether they be urban agriculturalists, whether they be in rural areas or in peri-urban areas. So it's an ongoing tool that we hope to finish and launch before the end of this year. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Charles. We now have Awande Buthelezi, who's been our lead researcher and organizer and coordinator of the Climate Justice Deal. The Charter calls for a climate justice deal for South Africa, what we prefer to also call a climate emergency social contract. So a lot of work has been done on this, and over to Awande to give us an overview, etc.
Thank you. So the Climate Justice Charter is a plurivision of an alternative, equitable, and ecocentric society that we can build for ourselves. It is an effort to resist moving down a path of pain and destruction for the people of the world and the people of this region on our planet. Of the 14 systemic alternatives outlined in the Charter, they serve as the foundation on which this vision will be built, along with the goals and principles outlined in the Charter. The Climate Justice Deal takes the goals, principles, and alternatives introduced in the Charter and puts them into policy form. We've hosted 3 workshops between the end of last year to this year in June and August, where we had invited both international and local researchers and heterodox economists to take the Charter and think through in policy formation how we can make this vision, these principles, and these alternatives real. And with that, we have come to what we are now formulating in this Climate Justice Deal, beginning with a diagnostic overview, which will review the climate science, saying what we have to understand and what's in store for our region, the risks that we face as a country in a heating world, the fair share that South Africa must contribute in mitigating our emissions, and the carbon lock-ins, how they will and are already costing us from the droughts, floods, and other natural disasters through which this region of the world suffers through. This is followed by a critique through the lens of the Climate Justice Charter of mainstream economics and a construction of a climate justice systemic plurivision, followed by a macroeconomic pillars for a deep, just transition. These 3 introductory sections set the stage for a policy perspective regarding the challenges that we face and the foundations which are required to build a deep, just transition. These sections will also help draw a framework for the macroeconomic context, which has constructed our current paradigm, and for us to understand what we need to do to challenge, to build beyond this for the new world and society that we require. The principles and alternatives in the Charter will be given policy form across 8 different policy thrusts. The first of these is addressing inequality. The work which we've done in this policy thrust is around some of the inputs which we've gotten through our workshops and the partners and researchers who have worked with us that have taken the Charter and found ways to translate it into policy form. 2 of the fundamental sources through which this thrust looks to help address inequality in a world that is configuring itself for the climate crisis is through the use of democratic public utilities and the universal basic income grant. Democratic public utilities speaks to healthcare, transport, and education, things which we will require in our society to make accessible to all who live in our society. through the selection and implementation of just and democratic policies to drive economic diversification, distribution for a sustainable future. Whereas the Universal Basic Income Grant, which has gained popularity in recent years, particularly over the past 2 years of the pandemic, and the government has now come around to consider it, with Treasury currently looking into how they would implement such a grant, or by continuing the 350 grants. What we understand as the Climate Justice Charter movement, and through the perspective of the Climate Justice Deal, is that a universal basic income grant is a foundation and a necessary tool, both for wealth redistribution and minimizing inequality, but also to help us bridge this deep just transition which we require. It must have a maximum reach, and it must have a maximum effect for it to be something that we require to do what we needed to do in this period. It is something which must be done now, not a 2050 pipe dream, not a promise that will be thrown down later down the road, but a policy intervention which we require currently. It is necessary for us to tackle poverty, inequality. It is necessary for us to redistribute wealth in the way that we need, and can act as a mechanism through which the rich can pay for their ecological debt. It will also help cushion workers and communities who need to shift to new industries and new sources of employment and sectors within the deep just transition. It is also necessary for a country such as ours, struggling with the chronic levels of unemployment and the flexibility required for us to have the jobs that will require in a climate just society. Next of these policy thrusts is water and food sovereignty, developing and expanding the work which we've done on food sovereignty systems, water systems, and pathways through which we can expand these to the whole populace of our country and the region. Climate jobs, where we'll be looking specifically at 3 areas. These would be firefighting and disaster management services, rethinking and understanding the Disaster Management Service Act for a nationwide service that activates the citizenry and is nationally responsive. We have had an understanding of how much that is required within this state of disaster which we've lived over through the past 2 years, and we'll need to upgrade this and democratize the system to be something that is worthy of being able to withstand what we face with the increasing climate crisis. Natural climate solutions to create ecosystems and solutions. Creating work for people to understand and expand our natural carbon sinks, our natural commons, recuperating wetlands, rehabilitating and regenerating this environment. And finally, local government program and climate jobs, which will help with regards to removing fire loads, fixing water leaks, managing public spaces, and retrofitting houses to be sturdy enough for a heating world. In addition to these jobs, we also look at other low carbon jobs such as cultural and the arts. Cultural programs needed as a cultural resource to help in the creative ways through which we can help shift society's consciousness in preparing it and helping it understand the changes to come. And finally, care work, which is often underlooked or overlooked, but is a very essential and necessary low carbon job which will require for the society which we're moving towards. This is followed by rapid decarbonization programs, which will be understood through alternative energy systems, zero waste by going beyond landfills and incinerators, being able to take all the outputs from our economy and feed them back into the system so that things aren't left and wasted, but we use our resources in a way which is reflective of the limitations which we have on this planet. This is followed by eco-centric manufacturing. Decent and appropriate working time has to be within a carbon budget, but we also need to focus on the technologies and innovations that can push a deep just transition. And there's plenty of room for this with regards to the manufacturing industry and those technologies that can be developed in our country. And for all of this, we also have to look at financing. And in our financing in this document, we ask ourselves, how do we finance such a transition? We look at the different possible sources of financing, from the DBSA to creating cooperative banks, restructuring and understanding the post banks to help them work alongside cooperative banks, finding ways to work intelligently and creatively with taxes, from corporate carbon and climate debt taxes for the rich, wealth taxes, and other mineral funds that can help us in financing this transition. Finally, we require and expand on understandings of democratic planning and a people-driven climate justice state by democratizing the politics of climate and giving every citizen a voice. We hope that this document will build on the work of the Charter in charting out an alternative vision for our society by creating and putting forward the roadmap and tools through which this society can be built. Hopefully, this can be a new foundation for what we as South Africans understand as the bare minimum for what our country requires to transition in this heating world. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanda. That was excellent. We now have the third panelist on tools for the deep, just transition, and that's Ferial Adam. Ferial's between meetings, so she's hopped back onto our meeting, and she's been leading our work around developing a people's planning tool so that we can shape the climate law that's coming around planning and decarbonization, systemic adaptation, and so on. Over to you, Ferial.
Thanks, Comrade Vish. Yeah, there's a lot happening around COP26 today, so I have to be in many places at once. But thank you. So we as COPEC, we're developing, and the Climate Justice Charter Movement, we're developing what we're calling a deep just transition tool. And just to say that we have produced other guides for activists and toolkits that are available on our websites and stuff. But just to talk about, everyone's talking about the just transition, and it's a term that comes from the unions. Some time back, in the COP negotiations, etc., this whole idea of a just transition came about, which basically means that you need to stop fossil fuels, but you need to bring in communities, people, workers, etc., and take them through with you to that transition. So you can't have these changes happening without taking people with you. So it's a bottom-up approach to a transition. But the reason why we are now calling it a deep just transition is, as you will see, everyone is talking about a just transition. And some of the statements that have come out from the South African government talks about, we will do this, blah, 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 because of a just transition. They're also using it as a way not to shut down coal-fired power stations, because then they're saying, no, we, as a just transition, we will be moving forward and keeping this alive. But that is a fallacy in everything that was produced, like mentioned today from different comments earlier in the discussion on ecocide and Eco-Fascism, shows you that we have to stop coal, and we have to have a transition away from it, not towards it, which is what sometimes government sounds as if they're doing. So that's why we developed this tool, because people, it sounds like this term, it sounds like pie in the sky, but we as COPEC strongly believe in this in a deep just transition, to take this our term back from corporates, from the SASOLs, the ESCOMs, governments around the world who are using it, to give it back the meaning of why it was established. But then this tool that we developed, or we're still in the process of finalizing, it basically sets out, the climate crisis. It sets out the war in nature. It also is, as Wanda has talked about, his tool, that tool, that it's also based on the Climate Justice Charter. So that is the foundational document for all of us in terms of how, we actually say we've got this broad vision as the Climate Justice Charter, and this is how to put it into implementation phase, how to really make it a reality. And that's where the tools come in. We've also looked at a just transition in different parts of the world and what people are doing. So in this document, we also talk to, we give examples of what has happened in places like Venezuela and Kerala, and then the People's Science Movement in India, and how they've been pushing against privatization, etc., which is all linked to to thinking about a different process and thinking about a deep, just transition. We saying that the key place to actually get a bottom-up approach is the democratic planning. And so we look at how does planning work in South Africa. And at the moment, we talk about things like the integrated development plan, the national development plan, and how government has gone about to develop those plans with some kind of superficial stakeholder engagement that they use. And we're saying that it needs to go beyond that. We need to be able to change that planning process so that we have more control over our water, food, and energy systems. And that is what this tool talks to. So it basically then stipulates how a deep, just transition can take place in workplaces, in communities, and local government, because that's an important arm that we need to take with us as well. And then we also, in terms of, we look at after transitioning in communities, workplaces, and local government, how do we learn to survive together, and how do we make the commons a reality so that it's not a far removed idea? And I think we're seeing some of that. So basically, we're putting that into the tool where, I mean, if you look at our local government elections that have happened, a lot of people didn't vote, and some people who did vote had changed their vote because people want to have back the power. People want to have a say over their lives. And that is what we think we can use this tool to do, and that we can better use it to build a more democratic planning and build solidarity on the ground that then gives room for a deep, just transition. So that's basically the document. The tool is we're still completing it, but I think that we have taken from government policies, we've taken from activism, we have taken from the Climate Justice Charter, and we've developed what I think would be a really good tool to have. And to give, we talk about a just transition, but, and we saying deep, just transition. I think we're the only people that are talking about a deep, just transition. And I think we need to change that, because we need to take the term away from people that have abused it, like corporations and government, which I've said. And this tool, it gives us a pathway. And that is the nice thing about what has happened with the Climate Justice Charter movement, is that we've been able to give pathways and how to do things from a bottom-up approach. And if it's used, and if we use it wherever we are, it has the potential to really change things and be powerful and build a real democracy that will give room for a deep, just transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ferial. So comrades, food sovereignty, the People's Climate Justice Deal, or climate emergency social contract, or the People's Planning Tool, none of these ideas were on the agenda of COP26. These ideas are in the people's space, in street politics, in the climate justice politics that is there on our planet, and it's in our charter. So we are now, comrades, faced with the challenge of shaping the deep, just transition from below. This is where the front line of climate justice activism is. It's not about making noise. It's not about just making critique. It's about solving the problems on the ground. So let's hear from you, comrades. What do you think about these tools? How can we use them? What are your thoughts? And how can we start shaping our communities and workplaces? How can we make the breakthrough around food sovereignty and deep, just transition pathways in our communities, in our workplaces? Can we use these tools to do climate risk assessments? Can we use these tools to ensure carbon profiling of our communities and workplaces, and then work on policies and strategies, etc.? Because this is where we are going. This is the world we are going into. And as activists, we've got to make that leap. So your thoughts, comrades, your feedback, it's open. You can ask questions to the panelists, etc. Yes, there's a couple of hands up. Let's see, who is this? Itumeleng, go ahead, and then Dr. Kereng.
I just want to say that, I mean, for me, the tools work in such a way that any tool that will make a community realize their value is an important tool for them, because the minute they realize their value, they realize the surmountable task that they need to have in order for them to have a just or a transition in their communities. So the tools for me, as I absorb them and I've used them, are in a way of putting together the community and making the community aware of their power. But also, as you're going through the tools, you are distilling ideas within the community, which says, this is our thing, we need to take hold of it. Because sometimes as activists, we tend to run away with the thought without getting the backup of the communities. So you find that when you go to work to communities, you are the one in the front runner, but the whole of the community is left behind. So the purpose of the tool is to develop champions within the communities who will just simply run away or gather the momentum for the community to continue with the work on activism. Thanks, Bishop.
Thank you, Tumeleng. Dr. Kereng, and then we'll get some responses from the panel.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, I think the three tools are very, very important and very, very crucial. And they needed to happen yesterday. But we know, even our children have already indicated for it, everything was broken for the last 30 years or so. So, Chairperson, I'll start with local government. I've been a councillor for the last 5 years. Okay, they've kicked me out. It was obvious they were going to kick me out. So starting at local government, you know, I think we should use the resources that they are already having or using, because they talk of IDP. You know, the story of IDP. It's a sad one, because we're talking of the communities coming and giving input in what needs to develop them, which is not happening. I mean, we'll be talking about the food security. The departments, all of them that are relevant, they're not assisting. Firstly, when you're talking ordinary garden, people will tell you, but there's no water from the municipality, which is true, there's no water. So, but we should do with the limited resources that we're having. Coming to the bill itself, I think, yes, Comrade Farrell is very, very correct that we should start planning as to how we are going to influence the bill that is coming before Parliament. Well, I don't have ideas how we are going to do it, but I think we should start working on it, because there is a tool already in front of us. And the last one on the charter, all of them, we're talking the finances, but comrades, Awande has stipulated it as to how do we approach it. And I saw somebody in the chat is saying the Minister of Finance is going to introduce the, the family grant, which kind of is making us also, is drawing us back. We want to see our communities participating. Itumeleng has said it very loud and clear. We want to see our communities coming to the front. That clip, or okay, that presentation by comrades on the food security, using the old that was used previously and then continuing with it now. I think we need to resuscitate a lot of things that can take us forward. I agree with the tools. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kereng. So over to our panelists. Who would like to go? Charles, Awande, Farrell. And there's also a question by Sunny as well in the chat line about asking the panel what they feel about the 130 billion allocated from the 7 nations to South Africa. Do we have faith that will be effective?
Can I jump in, Comrade?
I
mean, I also missed the question from Dr. If she can please write it into the chat, it would help. But in terms of Sunny Morgan's question, so I think that, well, it's a difficult one. I mean, I think what some of the comrades have been saying is that we need more detail on this deal. Just announcing, and we've seen previously where, you know, they've announced big numbers, but we don't have the details. So we don't know if this is going to be for repurposing Eskom power stations. Is this going to be conditional What are the conditions around this? And it's a loan, right? So that's some of the things that we need to think about, is that how much of it is new funding? Does the deal commit South Africa to new debt? So I think we need a lot more to unpack it. On the whole, though, some activists are saying, it's a movement in the right direction. We definitely need the funding. It's not enough. It's definitely not enough in what they owe. But it's also, what kind of funding is this? Is it a loan, and is it going to lock us into paying back debt? So that's something that is worrying. But we need to keep track of it. We need to, as activists, make sure that there's a process that's transparent and that we understand how that money is going to be spent. And I think from now, we need to be saying that we want everything to be open, and we want to know how that money is going to be spent, who's going to be in charge of it, all of those kind of things. So I think it is an important step. It's not the answer, it's not the panacea, but it's something, and we must see how we use it. So Vish, did you get the other question? Sorry, come.
No, I mean, I think generally there was a positive response to the presentations, particularly by Dr. Kereng. And, just the issue of local government. Maybe you want to say something about local government and its place in what we are trying to do.
I think what we're seeing in South Africa, I think it's the beginning, and I think that we can build on it. We're going to look at more independent people getting involved and trying to make things different. And it's not about politics anymore. I think people are saying that they want local government to change people's lives in terms of just basic services. So I think that is the point, is that with a deep just transition tool, which is the one I'm working on, is that we know that implementation is going to take place at a local government level. And so we have to take local government along with us in that whole process. Sadly, though, I don't know how feasible that's going to be, given, so many hung councils, and also the fact that many of our municipalities are in big trouble financially, and corruption is rife. So it's a big challenge for us, I think. But I do think that it's an important arm of government that we need to start taking back as people.
Thanks, Feril. Charles, do you want to come in, and then Awande?
Thank you very much, Vish. Dr. Kereng and Itumeleng raised the important issue of community participation. The Climate Justice Charter calls for deepening democratic participation. A top-down technocratic approach is not going to solve social problems, more especially the problem of hunger. As the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign and COPEC, we were invited to be part of an imbizo by the Food and Agriculture Organization. And one of the things that we raised in that imbizo is the importance of including communities, including the subaltern, the wretched of the earth, in solutions to the current food crisis that we are facing. So this tool and everything else that we are working with, part inspired by the Charter, is based on deepening democratic participation, more especially at a local government level, because that is where the people are. So the tools you're looking at them, all of them, are about strengthening democratic participation, making sure that the people's lived experiences are not undermined for experts. Yes, experts are important, but they cannot replace people's lived experiences. So the tools we are working on are with that understanding, based on deepening democracy, based on the principles of the Climate Justice Charter. So I just wanted to say that, Vish. Thanks.
Wande, there's also a point about the family grant and so on, and you've been leading our UBIC now campaigning. So please say something.
Thank you, Vish. I think actually I'll start with that, with the family grant campaigning. As of September, it was becoming quite clear that the state and treasury was feeling the pressure to make some kind of decision with regards to a basic income grant, or a continuation of the 350, or a universal basic income grants, as we were speaking and advocating for. Some of the research that we had done at the beginning of the year was to actually look at the differences between some of these targeted grants, where you look at unemployed people, let's say a broadly unemployed category, so people who aren't in school or not receiving any other grants, but would require one. And then also an adult one, the adult big, and the U big. So those ones kind of helped us see what were the effects of a means tested and a targeted cash transfer, where we found that where you looked at just unemployed people at the food poverty line, the low, and then the lower bounded poverty line and the upper bounded poverty line, that these different amounts with these targeted specifications for who should get the money had different impacts on inequality reduction and in terms of poverty alleviation. And it goes without saying, I mean, I shouldn't say it goes without saying, but because the international studies and the research that has been done and conducted over the years and currently continues to show that it's the universal basic income grant which has the maximum effect for poverty alleviation and inequality and reducing inequality, even at the upper bounded poverty line amount of, let's say, 1,331 Rand was the figure at the time. And even at the lower bounded poverty, the food poverty line, which was 614 Rand, you saw at least a 52.5% reduction in poverty. And that's with a basic income grant at the lowest amount. Whereas a targeted one like the unemployed one or the adult one, you would see between 38% and the 52% reduction in poverty. So with this information, these numbers, and the research that other people have done, obviously in the pilot studies and the work that we've done in our research, we understood that in the context of the climate crisis and the deep just transition, communities and workers need to be compensated and protected in these transitions. So that's where the universal basic income grant has its effects in being able to minimize the economic ramifications of some of these shocks or the position that we're in right now with regards to COVID and other such disasters and things that can destabilize society and economies that will come with the climate crisis. So what the government has done with the family grant, or rather, let me say Treasury more specifically, is to take a political approach of understanding that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence, information, and research advocating for the need for a basic income grant. Not all of it looks through the climate perspective as we have done, but there's a wealth of research that is showing that, and data and societal consensus, a lot of that which we've helped to try push through the climate justice work that we do. And they understand that within the confines of this moment, there's a limited room for them to push back or completely negate the need for such a grant. So we understand the family grant as a cop-out, in a sense, to not fully implement what is required, but to play that political role of implementing what would seem necessary to appease. I want to also then say that in addition to this, if I just take also what Sunny was talking about, in that part of this scrutiny that we have to do on when this family grant is implemented and the work that must be done to, I won't say oppose, but put pressure for that to be expanded into the universal basic income grant that we require, is to also understand that within this funding and this deal that's being done, this just transition deal that they've done, this $8 billion, that some of those processes, this funding has been given for, intersects with where the grants should be implemented to help these workers and communities in the transition. And I think for us as activists in the climate justice space, this is where it is our role to analyze and scrutinize and pick apart some of these programs as we start to get more and more information. Of course, as it is right now, cards are being held close to their chest with regards to this financing and with regards to the grants and a lot of these other programs, which we will be seeing now, these watered down programs, which are being implemented right now because of the rhetoric and the work that activists have done to put these issues on the table. So it's very important that we see these things in that kind of context. This grant question, this family grant context, it intersects with this funding deal and the next 3 years or 4 years, I think, over which this funding will be allocated. So we need to keep that in mind as we're picking these things apart. I also wanted to say that another thing we must keep our eyes on is that this deal and the way in which it's been negotiated and is going to come about, we must not also forget that there was $100 billion amount that was being promised from the Paris Agreement with regards to what the global North would owe countries of the global South. And that has not been met. It's been one of the greatest failures leading up to this COP. And we need to also keep that in mind when we hear the news of this funding, because we have to see where things are being shifted and where responsibilities are being withdrawn from with regards to countries of the global North. So those things intersect, and I just wanted to make that kind of connection with regards to that. I also just want to thank, I see that Shanaz is leaving, so we thank you for being able to attend. We look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. I also just want to finally also respond to the local government and the community question, into saying that the work which we're doing on the climate justice deal is that there's that intersection with the deep just transition, but also understand that within a society, the way our state is constructed and the way societies function, in that if things don't work at the local level, then they won't work at the national level. And the jobs that we require to bring this vision to life, to have an ecocentric, equitable society which is resilient for the crisis that we're facing, we need local resilience, which cannot happen by strengthening local governments alone, but strengthening and capacitating communities, giving them the tools, skills, and knowledge for them to also work in tandem with local governments actively to bring forward some of these changes and processes that we require. Thank you.
Are there any final questions to our panel or comments? Or have there been any other comments in the chat line that anyone wants to respond to from the panel? Sunny's making this point about 1.5 degree plan. Can we build the alternative in time? There was a hand up here. Aubrey Majola, go ahead, and I think that's about it, and then we'll wrap up. Aubrey, go ahead. Go ahead, you have your hand up. Hello, Aubrey, can you go ahead? Kobani. Okay, I don't know, the person may be on mute. I'm going to wrap this up. So I'm going to ask the panel to respond to the final question. And I think that came from Sunny about time. And then I'll just make some concluding comments. Go ahead, Charles, Awande and Ferriel. Charles?
Oh, sorry, I was talking while on mute, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just looking for Sunny's question.
I could go in the meantime.
Go ahead, Awande. Go ahead, Awande. Yes, go ahead.
So, as Sunny's question with regards to COP26 and the possibility of a 1.5 degree plan not being implemented, how can we build, or do we believe that we can build the alternatives in time to save us from the worst impacts? And I think that this question is a necessary question. I think it's twofold for me, particularly looking at through the lens of the Climate Justice Charter and the Climate Justice Deal, is that we understand that there's a local, South African, regional, and African and international context through which we look and understand the climate crisis, understanding inequitable or inordinate impacts with regards to how heating and the climate change will affect us in this region, continent, and then globally in relation to other countries. So there's that aspect of understanding, do we have the time to build the alternatives? And I think that when it comes to these kind of questions, which I think is a really great and sobering question that Sunny is presenting, it's easy to be, you know, for the reality of things and the realism of how slow and you know, purposefully obfuscating some of these processes are, that it can fill us with a sense of dread at, you know, can this actually be done? It's a very sobering question. But I think, to be honest, and I may also, maybe because, you know, there's a saying of preaching to the choir, but I'm saying maybe because we're within the choir, hearing the youth voices today and understanding the vision that the Charter presents and the work that can be done, I am confident that if we double down on the work that we're doing right now, if we build these alternatives ourselves at a community level, at a local level, scale them up, work with each other, the way in which we're interacting right now on this platform from wherever we are in the country, I believe that we can help build something to protect us from the worst impacts. I think that the answers are there. I think that we're not working from scratch. I don't think we're working in the dark. I think that the problem we have, though, is one of an information overload, of seeing the lack of action from the top and the perceived lack of power that we feel because of the way in which they have purposefully shaped our society for us to not feel our input and feel our strength. But I do believe, and I'm emboldened and encouraged by the work that activists are doing, that we can build these alternatives.
Awande and Farrell, do you want to go next?
I have to agree with what Awande said, but I also want to say that we must be, you know, for me, I think it's time to delegitimize this COP26. I mean, the COP in itself, the UNFCCC negotiations every year, I think that they're elitist, and I think they don't listen to the developing countries, and we don't have power. So even if you go there, the United States will have a delegation of like 300, and then the rest of us have like 2, and we need to split them in the various discussions and committees. So we need to also be realistic that, firstly, COP26, we need to delegitimize. We need to take away the power that it has and to decide and dictate the narrative of climate change. That must end now. We've been saying it for 10 years. We need to continue saying it. I mean, activists that are popular people, they mustn't go there. We must stop that. You know, some of the organizations in Africa have called for a boycott because of COVID, because of vaccine apartheid. And that has been just ignored, totally ignored. So I think firstly, that's the first part. The second part is, you know, my view is that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And that's the reality, Sunny, is that yes, we are going to be living through the worst impacts of 1.5. But for me, our movement, building this movement, making it stronger, building grassroots groups, you know, around the world, is important, because this is the time where things can be done differently. So we might be facing all of these challenges, but it is the time now to change the way we operate. And I think COVID was a small glimpse into what can be. It changed the work life entirely. Before that, people were saying, no, you can't work like that. And it changed it. So there's definitely, you know, with these kind of atrocities and challenges and pandemics, because it's a climate pandemic, that it forces people to think differently. It forces people to work differently. And I think that the whole concept that we've been building from the ground becomes a reality. So I'm not terrified by the impacts. And maybe it's because I have this middle class behavior or whatever, I'm safe. But I think as a whole, before it gets better, it's going to get worse, but we need to change how we respond to that. And hence the deep just transition. Thank you, comrades.
Great. Charles, final comment from you?
Yes, just to say, I also agree with Ferial and Awande. Things can look very, very frightening, especially when you look at how the climate crisis is already impacting the most marginalized, how it's already impacting the most vulnerable in society. You can sometimes feel sort of defeated, but yes, there is time to build these alternatives. And the most wonderful thing is that we are building these alternatives. This platform is proof that we do have the power to build alternatives and to make changes. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks to our panel. Comrades, I'll just make a few concluding points and we can wrap up. I think just on the question of, yeah, on urgency and time, I agree with Ferial and the general sentiment that we must delegitimize the COP. I mean, many of us reached this conclusion a long time ago, that the national terrain of struggle is where the climate struggle will be fought and whether we will win or be defeated. And that's what we have to escalate and we have to build. COP26 is just confirming that. But I think there's two conceptions of time that we must keep sharply in focus. There's the elite conception of time. And they've been pushing the goalposts further down the road. They've been kicking the can down the road, okay, since 1992 till 2021. And they've got no serious solutions to solve this problem. Then there's the people's conception of time, because the people's conception of time is shaped by the lived realities of climate shocks, weather extremes, and so on. That's begun, okay? And that conception of time is going to shape this country and it's going to shape the world, and it's coming. You can call it climate determinism if you like, but that's coming. And it's going to have legs, it's going to have feet, it's going to have expression, it's going to have political will and power through the people. And that's why we've got to build. The second point I want to make is that we've got to think about the just transition as the terrain of struggle. And in the South African context, when I look around in terms of where progressive forces are sitting and what they are doing and so on, what we are doing in the climate justice charter movement process is very specific and very different, and it's very unique. We are taking that struggle head on, and we are trying to develop the tools, but also the policies that can help us shift mass forces and shift the balance of power in society. That work is now at its beginning. We are closing a phase of the climate justice charter, developing it, presenting it onto the national agenda to society, etc. This next phase of our work is to be guided by that vision, but to deepen that process. And that means intensifying the climate justice struggle. And that means confronting head on the forces that stand in the way of this. And we've got to do this in a way that moves society to a higher level, that moves things in a direction that is going to bring about change. And that's where we've got to put our energies. And so these tools are really about a new kind of grassroots activism. These policies we are developing is about this new kind of activism to accelerate and deepen the deep just transition. The last 2 points I'll make is that on November 9th, and that's on Tuesday, we're going to be in Cape Town in Parliament. We've been resource constrained around this action, but it's amazing the responses we are getting from activists in the area as far afield as Graafrenet and so on. We're going to have small scale farmers there from different parts of the province and even parts of the country. We're going to have young people. The children's movement is going all out to mobilize, to be there. We're going to have waste pickers. We're going to have informal traders. They're going all out to mobilize, including the leadership of the 10,000 strong CITA is going to be there, etc. We've invited the unions, but again, the response is very disappointing. Students from universities are mobilizing and they are going to be there, and so on. Faith-based communities are mobilizing and they're going to be there. So this is a turning point moment where we are going to Parliament to tell them that they failed us. They can't hide behind COP26. They can't hide behind these ruses and these false solutions and so on. And so we are really going to, if you like, clash with our dishonorable members of Parliament. So if you're in Cape Town, you have friends or you have family there or comrades there, please ask them to join us from 2 to 5 p.m. on November 9th. The final point I'll make, comrades, is the what next question. And in many ways, this conversation has been continuing. It's continued from our October 16th assembly. It's continued today. We'll be having another workshop in Cape Town where we'll further deliberate on this question, and we'll be surfacing a document for further engagement around what next for the movement. And thereafter, we'll be acting on that with the priorities it sets out. So comrades, thank you for your time. Thank you to all our presenters. Thank you to all of you for attending. Thank you to the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation and the COPAC team for making this happen. And let's continue building, comrades. Let's take these conversations further into our communities, workplaces, families, etc. We will share a recording of this very shortly. Take care and see you on Tuesday if you can make it to Cape Town or are in Cape Town. Amandla.
Aware too. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. See you on Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone.